There's a central part of the 2024 election that no one is talking about.
Reagan is our projected winner.
If you look back on old videos of election night coverage, which I know we all do, a funny thing jumps out. The colors are all weird. In 2024, we all know the color rules. Republicans are red, Democrats are blue, and swing states are purple. Everyone references it.
The red states and blue states.
Blue states and red states.
It's the basis for jokes and memes, and even fashion choices. But as recently as the 1990s, that was not the agreed upon rule. Now, these are colors at the end of the day, right? Like, who cares? But it shows us something notable. A lot of what we consider written in stone when it comes to presidential politics is actually super new in the grand scheme of things. And one of the best examples of that is swing states. This year, basically everyone agrees that the election will be decided by a core group of 7 swing states: Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Nevada, Arizona, North Carolina, and Georgia. But why those states? And how do we get to a point where a small group of states, representing like 15% of the country's population, are deciding the election year after year? Let's do a quick history dive. Since 1988, no one has won the presidency by double digits. Now, that sounds kind of normal, right? Of course no one has done that. That would be crazy. But in historical terms, it's actually quite unusual. We are currently on the longest stretch of single-digit presidential races in American history. But even as the national margin is stuck in single digits, almost permanently super competitive, individual states have moved farther apart. Here's one way to think about it. In 1988, George H.W. Bush won about 53% of the vote and won the election by about 7 points. Solid win. And he won 40 states total. Fast forward to 2008. Barack Obama also won by about 7 points, also with about 53% of the vote, but he won 12 fewer states than Bush, only 28. And the reason for that is simple. An increasing number of states are getting calcified into a consistent party identity. Since 2000, 35 out of 50 states have voted for the same party for president. That's 70% of states not changing their vote for the entire 21st century. And together, those statistics encapsulate a really important trend in recent decades. Even as our national elections have become closer and more competitive year after year, the margins in individual states have become wider and less competitive. Compare this year's crop of 7 swing states to previous years. In 2000 and 2004, the map was almost as big as 20 swing states. Even in 2008 and 2012, both parties felt that between 10 and 15 were in play. So we've seen a big overall shrink in the number of actually competitive states. Hence, why those swing states get a ton of attention and a ton of money year after year. And of course, what is a swing state changes hugely over time. Tennessee was once a swing state. Cut to 2020, and it was one of the reddest states in the country. In 2012, Obama announced his re-election bid in the 2 states both campaigns thought were the most competitive, Virginia and Ohio. Now, both of them have moved so far to the left and to the right that neither side is even campaigning in them this fall. So how does a swing state become a swing state? There are basically 2 main ways. First, the ground shifts within a state. New people moving in, new people registering to vote, whatever. Virginia is a good example of this. It used to be solid red, then it saw a big rise in non-white immigrant communities and college-educated professionals working for the federal government there, both of whom helped it tilt blue. The second way is because of the ground shifting nationally. People who used to be one party just switching their votes. West Virginia is a good example of this. It used to be solid blue, then a bunch of people who had lived in small coal mining towns for years went from strongly Democratic to strongly Republican. Of course, neither of those are really swing states anymore. In part because the trends we just talked about became so strong that it just made them fully red or fully blue. Now, Georgia is still a top swing state, and it's actually a good example of both trends. It's seen a boom of non-white voters in recent years, brought by an increase in its Asian and Latino populations, and an increase in both new black residents and the number of existing black residents who are registered to vote. But it's also seen a bunch of the kinds of white voters who vote for Democrats move to the state. Georgia famously went from red to blue in 2020. And yes, turnout from people of color was a huge part of that. But something a lot of people don't know is that from 2016 to 2020, the white share of the electorate in Georgia actually held steady. The reason Biden won anyway is that a lot of those new white voters are the kinds of white voters who've shifted towards Democrats in recent years. Well-off, college-educated, white-collar people who either used to vote for Republicans or used to live elsewhere. So Georgia moving from solid red to swing state is a story of both national trends and local trends. And if there's a lesson, it's that, like in physics, one state becoming a presidential swing state can often have an equal and opposite movement. States like Iowa and Ohio, which used to be perennial swing states year after year, are on the opposite track of states like Georgia and Arizona. going from purple to solid red recently. Not because the people living in them have massively changed, but because the voting patterns of the residents have changed. Republicans have surged among white people without college degrees, many of whom used to vote for Democrats and who make up huge swaths of those states. Without a much better showing among that demographic, those states are just unwinnable for Democrats now. So the states that are actually competitive have to have some mix to make them competitive. In some states, like Pennsylvania, it's a mix of a lot of solidly Democratic votes, like in Philadelphia, a lot of solidly Republican votes, like in the rural West, and swing voters in the suburbs. In others, like Arizona, it's just about having a ton of swing voters, like in the suburbs of Phoenix, where most of the state lives. Now, there is a darker side to all of this, and that is that the narrowing of the electoral map to just a handful of states has a real impact on policy. If a state has the exact right alchemy of voters to help a candidate win an election, that state's needs and issues objectively just get more attention from the government. That's just indisputable. As president, Donald Trump openly tried to steer extra money towards voters in key swing states like Wisconsin. Joe Biden has made more official visits, meaning as president, not as a candidate, to the swing state of Pennsylvania more than any other state. And we know that getting attention from politicians directly impacts policy. For a long time, the Iowa caucus, being the first contest in both parties, meant politicians on both sides of the aisle supported huge subsidies for ethanol, because without doing so, they never win. For a long time, politicians in both parties treaded really carefully around the issue of the Cuba embargo because of the high number of Cuban American voters in Florida, the biggest swing state. Now that Florida is no longer really a swing state, a lot of Democrats are less concerned about courting Cuban American voters, and in turn have started to change their positions. Some politicians have been totally open about this. Back in 2015, Hillary Clinton openly said that the reason she found out about and rolled out a policy plan to fix the opioid crisis is because she met people affected by it while campaigning in New Hampshire, who she only met because the New Hampshire primary draws politicians to it. Now, the opioid crisis had actually hit a lot of other states, solid red states like Kentucky, years earlier. But those states aren't swing states, so no one campaigns in them, and national politicians don't hear their concerns. Poverty in the Mississippi Delta, overdose deaths in North Dakota, housing costs in California, sorry, you're not in swing states. Even local journalism, which is in a historic crisis right now, is better in a swing state. One study found that local TV stations in swing states were rolling in cash after hundreds of millions of dollars were spent on TV ads in 2020. And in 2024, that really is the reality of our presidential elections, decided by a very thin and very lucky slice of the country. And the power is enormous for anyone living in those states. In 2020, had just 80,000 votes switched in the core swing states, Donald Trump would have been reelected. That's a change in just 0.05% of all votes cast that year that would have changed the entire outcome.
Joseph Robinette Biden Jr.
So if you know a swing state voter, now's the time to check in with them. I don't know about you, but I've never seen an election like this. So if you're struggling to keep track of all of it, this is the place for you. Hit that subscribe button for more videos like this.